So has Jin been a pawn all along, and that helmet was for her? She was never beheaded by the mystery woman, like Jack was.
Right. I think that this is much more explicitly asking the question that happens in the book. Is it specific scientists and for a specific reason?
Right.
The show seems to be asking the question of why this scientist. In the book, the planet that the Santi are living on has been ripped in two. One of them being completely barren, the other one, life barely came back from. They barely survived it. And there used to be 11 other celestial bodies orbiting this system. There used to be 12 of them. They're down to one. Something's going to happen. They're going to plummet into one of these stars. They're going to be grabbed in the gravitational pull and slingshotted out of the solar system by one of these stars. It's happened to 11 other planets. It's going to happen to them.
That makes them more sympathetic.
Hello and welcome to Road Goes Ever On and On. Today, guest host Dawn and I are talking about Three Body Problem from Netflix, episodes 3 and 4, so spoilers are ahead. If you've watched the show previously, hopefully Mark is back next week, as long as he's not having too much fun on his vacation. But we've enjoyed having Dawn here in the meantime. If you're enjoying our content, a like would be appreciated. If you don't want to miss a single video, then feel free to subscribe and hit that bell icon for notifications. And with that, let's start off with science, philosophy, and history. I actually kind of want to start off with the fact that, having read the books, I want more of the science. I feel like this show is hitting the important beats, but without necessarily like the love for what is making it. It can't be this story without the science that is behind it.
I disagree, but okay.
And I don't feel like there's a love for it. Like, it just glosses over so much of it. It's got some beautiful moments.
Yeah.
But it glosses over how you get to those moments. And we'll kind of talk about some of those moments as we get to them. But I wanted to do a quick comparison of another show, which is actually a comedy. And so it had even less time to be able to hit certain things and needed to be kind of funny the entire time in order for it to be any good. And The Good Place. The Good Place went pretty seriously into philosophy. And it was never so much that it could be a turnoff. Like, you could ignore anything it said and not miss anything. But if you cared about it, if you appreciate it, if you want to learn more, it had so many references and actually spent some time on them. It talked about the trolley problem. It talked about different philosophers and what they brought. So if a show that is as silly as that...
But that's so much more relatable. Like, you give a trolley problem... I think
Is philosophy relatable?
When you break it down the way that show did, I think.
That's the thing. They came to it from a place of love. We love this, and we know how to share it with people in a way that they can also find appreciation for it.
Yes.
I don't feel like D&D, David Beinoff and D.B. Weiss.
I thought we were talking about Dungeons and Dragons.
I don't feel like they're coming at this from a place of love of the science. Like, they love the crazy story points.
Right.
And they're hitting those hard. And they've got these like killer visuals from it. But I don't feel like there's a love for the science behind it, which is capital science fiction. I feel like there's some science where it's like, it hits you with the premise, and then, and then the rest is like, let the story unfold. Like, this is science fiction.
But do you think the science makes the show, or makes, I guess, the books?
I think the science is so integral to the books.
You do?
You can't have... Yes, this is like... It barely even cares about the characters. It's like, the characters are so paper thin in it. Like, the story is driven so much by the science. And So for me, it's not that it's not that the show is unenjoyable. It's that the show is... And I know that it's a different medium, but it feels like it doesn't have that love for the science. And I feel like it is a very different product. And you may enjoy it, but you're definitely not going to come away with the same overall feeling.
That's fair. I mean, I can see that. To me, I think the show is enjoyable. Like, I don't think I would read the books. And to me, I feel like the science is mostly relative to the game. And in the show, there's more than just the game. There's so much dynamic between the characters, which may not be in the book. But I think that helps support, like, why people are making the decisions they're making. I mean, is the character. And so that's not as science-based as...
The game is a representation of what the Trisolorans are going through. So it's not just a game. Like, that is a way to... It's a tool that's being used to find who could be sympathetic to the cause.
Did you call them the Trisolorans?
Okay.
Santi?
Yes.
Santi?
So, in... Anybody who's read the English translation of the book is probably going to be more familiar with calling them Trisolorans, which is a translation of what they're called in the original text, which is the Santi.
The Sant, okay.
And
does that mean 3 sons?
I believe that it means like...
Because tri is 3. So
I think that it means... I think that was like a translation of it. And so it's one of those kind of like I call Clarence Dashi. There's a few things that I struggle with, like breaking away from the book. But, so, going a little bit more into the science. So, one of the few places where, and it's not even like they spent too much time on this, but I still thought it got more screen time than it should. One of the few places where D&D spent some screen time on the science.
Okay.
Was on science I don't think is in the books. Will is teaching a class, right? He's a teacher. Yeah. And he mentions, the multiverse, which is like, this is like sexy science. It's like the frontier of science, right? But also...
Marvel says it's the frontier of science, then clearly...
It's literally never made a prediction. So not to say that it's like complete,
Right.
Not to say it's a waste of time. Not to say it's wrong. But it is the most theoretical of theoretical science. Not the kind of thing you would generally spend too much time in a classroom. And if you saw a snapshot of what's in a science classroom, you're probably not going to get, like, just the theoretical science. And then when we see Jin meeting with Raj's family.
Yes.
She mentions, like, higher dimensions, and she does this whole thing. And this is, like, string theory stuff, which is in the same kind of area where it's really cool stuff. Wild. Right? It'll blow your mind. Never made a prediction. We have not a smidge of evidence that this is real. And I don't know, like, why... Of all the sciences that we're going to spend any kind of time on and actually see somebody trying to give a definition using a piece of non as, like, an example of, this 2D world actually has extra dimensions that people on the 2D world can't see, and that's, like, explaining extra dimensions. I don't know, why spend time on that? Why not, like, spend time on the actual science that matters to the story?
But, because I think it makes her character. She's nervous, she's, like...
Can't she talk about, like, the nerdiness of, like, gravity, or something related to... Because I don't think... I could be wrong, because I haven't read books 2 or 3. I don't think extra dimensions come up. I don't think the multiverse comes up. It's unrelated. This came up at one point in the show.
Okay.
Occam's razor, which isn't technically a science concept. I don't know the 100% definition, but if I were to boil it down, it's like the simplest definition is the most likely definition. And I think a good example of this, so when people are playing the game, they are asked to name themselves, and if they don't give themselves a good name, they get crap for that. I don't or they killed that.
Did you just make that up?
Well, no, because when Jack is like, my name is Jack, he gets crap for it, and he eventually does name himself Sir Francis Bacon.
Right.
So they all end up becoming... Nobody in the show is explicitly told you have to be named after an important character in the history of...
whatever.
Science.
Okay. It makes sense that they would gravitate towards things that interest them.
Yes. And so we have names like Copernicus, Sir Francis Bacon, Galileo, and there was one other one that came up in the show.
Aristotle, wasn't it?
Aristotle, yes, thank you. Aristotle. And, Aristotle had a big hand in the start of science, but definitely wasn't involved in the scientific method. You know, like I think a lot of the early philosophers maybe put a lot of emphasis on reason.
I just made a connection.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, like literally just happened.
Yeah.
Do you think that Aristotle and Galileo are other players?
I think they potentially are.
I thought they were in the, like, part of this.
I'm not 100% sure, but I potentially think they are.
I didn't even think of that.
So, Copernicus.
Yes.
Pop quiz.
Nope, don't know what that means. Sure do not.
He's the one that came up with the heliocentric model. The idea that, like,
I was gonna say that,
the
but
sun is the center. And for a period of time afterwards, it still was believed that the sun was not, that the earth was the center. And I know that
the sun's not.
I know that pictures, well, of our galaxy.
Right.
And spoiler alert, it is.
Earth?
No, the sun is the center. So I know that pictures help you out. So I wanted to. Here is an example of. I'll let you see it, and then I'll go ahead and show it of what the orbits of planets would look like in a geocentric orbit.
Do you know what this looks like? Do you remember the game when we were little, and it would just draw the circles? That is. I'm pretty sure that's what this is a picture of.
It's wild.
That's what this is a picture of,
isn't it?
It's just artwork.
So.
Sorry, you said this was what? If the Earth was the center.
Geocentric versus Earth, Helos, like the sun.
Yeah, no, totally knew that.
Heliocentric.
Well, it was a science class.
So here we get to philosophy.
Okay.
Occam's razor.
Okay.
This is before the scientific method, and before there's like, you know, we're going to do
hypotheses.
You know, a hypothesis. We're going to run tests. We're going to make predictions, and then other people can also, like, it should be reproducible. Other people can try and reproduce it if they can't come up with the same result. Everything like that.
Yeah.
So, with that being the case, like, this model is no different than the heliocentric model, where the sun is the center. Neither of them explain why things are the way they are. Like, neither of them explain that gravity is why it looks like this. But, so while neither of them can necessarily say, like, why this is right or wrong, and why the other one is right or wrong, using Occam's razor, if you look at the heliocentric model, it's just a simpler explanation. You know, so without having the mechanisms to explain why one is right over the other, it's a pretty damn good argument of, this one's really simple. Like, it's easier to believe that there could be something that's causing this than it is to think that there is something causing this wildness.
All right. That's a little over my head, and if I would have changed the channel on you. But, you know, it's totally fine.
I'll not spend too much more time on the sciencey aspect, but I did want to at least mention, as I was looking at some of these people, Galileo, born in Pisa, which I was actually born pretty close to Pisa because my parents were in the military. So, like him, he's Italian. He's born close to where I was born.
Okay.
He pushed hard for Copernicus's heliocentric model.
Okay.
But the church pushed back, and he was questioned by the Inquisition.
Sounds unfortunate.
Ended up having to recant what he said, and spent the rest of his life on house arrest. One of the, like, great people in history, one of the great, you know, astronomers, mathematicians, working towards scientists. I don't know if we, like, quite have science at this point. And it's just kind of interesting, you know, the life he ended up living after what he tried to contribute. He did contribute these things, but they didn't catch on in their time. The last thing that I wanted to kind of talk about was kind of like the differences in the book versus the show, in that specifically the book is based so much, the book takes place mostly in China. And something that kind of helps it out is you need a lot of information about Chinese history in order to understand a lot of the references.
Okay.
And so the English edition actually has like 40 footnotes.
A lot of footnotes.
So it almost, kind of going to like the sciencey aspect, it almost makes it seem a little bit like homework, you know, but it gives it all of these interesting reference. We spend more time with like the Cultural Revolution that happened in China, which is like the thing where Yi's dad is murdered.
The first.
And to me, it gives it like a little bit more color, a little bit more context, and makes it interesting. Like it helps me learn about a new world, and I like that. And I kind of wish we would have gotten that.
Our notes are very different. Are you done with yours?
Yeah, ma'am.
My history note was about the comment about Oppenheimer's mistress being found dead in the bathtub. That there was a lot of assassination theories about that. She was an alleged communist sympathizer.
Yeah.
And her dad is actually the one who found her like that.
To me, that feels like the last show we watched, Constellation, where they tried to like use real world events or real world conspiracy theories to tie into this like batshit idea.
Yeah.
And that reference is definitely not in the first book. Maybe it's in one of the later ones. I don't think so.
Probably not.
It feels like that kind of thing where it's like, whoa, what if we tie this to, I guess, like real U.S. world?
Right.
Definitely wouldn't have been in
Right.
Chinese-based book.
But her dad found her, and before he called the police or whoever, he like burned her correspondence with Oppenheimer, and then called them. And then when they did her autopsy, she didn't have any alcohol in her system, and the drugs that were in her system hadn't reached her organs yet. So there was like this whole conspiracy. So that's what I got out of the history. Very different.
And she was...
I mean, it kind of...
not necessarily communist sympathizer,
right.
Communist adjacent.
Right.
During a period of time of like the Red Scare.
Right, and Oppenheimer spent his life saying that she wasn't a communist, but she was on the FBI's watch list.
Yeah.
But he spent his life making sure that she wasn't considered that. I just thought it was an interesting parallel to this one. The assassination, potentially, right? Because these look like suicides, but are they suicides or are they...
Right.
Look at what happened to Jack. Are people killing themselves because that is the decision they're making? Or we know that they said that the game is tracking their... like, has biosensors in it.
Right.
So, is it somehow messing with their head and causing them to either think thoughts
and he is an important scientist, so
Correct.
it is like kind of looping it back to
right.
important scientists in history around when this might...
Yes.
It's an interesting kind of illusion they make.
Right.
Like,
yeah, and I'm sure that's for
let's try this.
American viewers or for net viewers. Like, but we also just saw the Oppenheimer movie, not recently, but last year. Well, Mark was here for Comic-Con.
Right after Comic-Con,
yeah. Last July.
Yes.
Which I thought was a great movie.
Yeah.
So it was just interesting.
Yeah. So let's chat a little bit about the game. We talked about it a little bit last week, but I feel like we saw more this week.
Yes. I'll start because I have some questions. Yep.
Okay.
It's me this
time.
time.
I have answers.
Let's see if they match.
10.
Wrong. What else you got?
32.
Also wrong. Okay. So my question is about the game. So they said there's 32 scientists that have committed suicide.
Okay.
Do you think that...
I said 32.
But that wasn't the answer to the question. We think that they're playing the game? Or are they like Augie and they're getting countdowns? Like Jack was playing the game and got murdered. I thought it was interesting, and I think Jin was really just a pawn this whole time. Because they said that Dr. Yi had the helmet. Had the headpiece.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And that was assumedly hers. Right?
And you have to get an invitation.
But Jin put it on and didn't get her head cut off.
Yes.
So, and then we find out at the end of episode 4 that Dr. Yi's mom is the head of the organization.
Yes.
So has Jin been a pawn all along, and that helmet was for her. She was never beheaded by the mystery woman, like Jack was when he put on Jin's, who actually was Dr. Yi's.
Yes.
Until he got sent his own, right?
Yeah.
So that's how she never got an invitation to play, but yet she's like their star.
I think that this is...
Or was that an oversight?
I think that this is much more explicitly asking the question that happens in the book. The book is just kind of like some scientists are killing themselves, but it's not pointing out like is it specific scientists and for a specific reason?
Right. Is it a certain science?
Versus...
Well, it did kind of talk about it as a certain science.
That's what I'm saying, is like the show seems to make the question much more explicit. The show seems to be asking the question of, like, why this scientist? In fact, somebody explicitly, possibly Clarence, says to Augie, you know, why you were working on this, and then you were asked to stop, and as soon as you stopped, the countdown stopped. You know, like, it very specifically is pointing out, like, why are they targeting your science?
Right.
You know, and so I think the show is just a little bit more obvious about the questions, versus the book is just kind of like, scientists are killing themselves. Why? And the storyline of the character that has Augie's part seeing the numbers, that's working on the nanotechnology, like the nanofiber technology, gets the countdown, and when they stop in order to calibrate their stuff, it's not like a full stop. It's like, whoa, we got to do some deep calibrations. Then the countdown stops. And so it's much more subtle, versus this one is kind of, maybe there's not enough time, maybe they don't trust their audience, maybe like...
Right.
It feels a little more hand-holdy, but it definitely feels like they're pointing at, like, this is happening to specific people for a specific reason. Why is that?
Right.
Which is definitely much more, like, it to a certain extent, it's more interesting, quicker at least.
Right.
Versus just feeling like something odd is going on, but what does it matter?
Right.
So yeah.
That's fair. My next question about the game is, how does Jin and Jack make it 2-player mode? They just, like, put their helmets on at the same time? Like, I don't know. You know, like, video games, it's like, select 1 or 2 players? They just put them on at the same time. Does that mean they never played? And because they weren't... I don't even know if they were technically on the same level.
You know, here's the thing,
but
though.
But then they
like,
magically were on the same level.
They kind of made a reference to it of, like, how... Oh, yours is always in Tudor England.
Oh, yeah.
You know, oh, but I currently live in England.
Right.
And, you know, they know something about me. How do they know? Like, once again, they are pointing that out.
Right.
Versus, I think in the book, the main characters takes place in, you know, ancient China. And then it is, I think, very briefly alluded to that there are people from other cultures that are also going through this. But it's not so explicitly pointed out. You know, versus this is kind of saying, like, why do they have me in this culture, and how do they know that? And, like, you know?
Still doesn't tell me how they got to make 2-player mode.
Maybe it always is, and it's based off, like, when you're logged in. If other people aren't logged in, because you can, like, speed... I don't know. You know what?
You're just making things up. You're just making things up. And then, so Jack puts on Jin's helmet, right? And immediately is transformed into that place, and then is then beheaded by the mystery woman.
Yes, a number of times, yeah.
But he's able to get it. Like, he puts it on and it works.
Yes.
Right? After Jack is killed...
Okay.
Is it Jack? No, after one of the scientists... No, it's not Jack. But someone else. They get one of the helmets.
Yes.
And then Clarence says that the engineering team can't get it to work.
Yeah.
But
versus like
if you just put it on, it works, and then it'll kill you or whatever, you know. But there's no reason that the engineering team can't make it work. Now
versus the engineering team saying, like, every time we put this on, we're murdered.
Right.
Yeah.
Now there is the possibility we see in episode maybe 4. It looks like Mike Evans is watching them play.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe there is an on-off switch somewhere that they can control, and since maybe they can, like, deactivate.
Maybe they knew they wanted to recruit Jack Smith at some point, but Jack Rooney, but he wasn't ripe yet.
I think it's more about his relationship with Jin. The fact that they were encouraging, they were working together.
Right.
He was making he was supporting Jin, and Jin seems to be like their prize pupil.
And so to that end, it could have been like, not that, like, we don't want you playing instead of her,
right? But you can play in addition to her.
We'll let you see it, so you get addicted to the world.
Right.
So once again, like, that could be that whole, like, they have the ability to.
It just seems like they're
see
making
who you are, and then, which once again kind of gets to those, like, who has how is this technology possible?
Right. Also, I think it's interesting that Jack is murdered at the end of episode 3.
Yeah.
And why is his made to look like a murder as opposed to a suicide, right? Like, Clarence is outside looking in that bedroom in his car, and he doesn't see them.
Yeah.
Which is weird because it's one thing to scrub video footage. It's another thing to literally scrub in real time, like someone's eyes who's not playing the game. But that's a separate issue. Regardless, she takes the time to murder him instead of making it look like he committed suicide and not bringing any attention to it. I thought it was just an interesting change of events that wasn't necessary, other than to affect the characters differently.
Yeah. I have a feeling that by season 2, when I've gotten into book 2, hopefully 3 at that point, that'll clarify some of this, because I think potentially this comes down to maybe there are some limitations for some reason.
But they were able to wipe Clarence's eyes in real time. Like, he did not see the room, but you could see that they were in the room.
Right.
So that just seemed like excessively powerful?
Yeah. Yeah.
So those are my kind of thoughts on the game.
So first off, science.
Now we're talking about the game. We already talked about the science.
Computer
Welcome
science.
to my life.
Computer science. Okay, so this goes back to, like, they don't have a love for the subject matter. When do you remember when they built the computer in the world? Did it have any impact on you in the game, in the show?
No. Nope. I don't even know what you're talking about.
They spent time on that. Dude,
what are you talking about?
Do you remember, like, there's a scene where there's, like, so many people and they have flags and they're like twist.
Oh yes, okay. I did not. I thought you meant like nuts and bolts making a computer machine.
No,
in the game
that
with
was
the ones and zeros.
Okay, that was a computer they built with people. It's doing the exact same thing as a computer built not with people. The exact same thing. But they spent zero time on it. The visual was gorgeous. I loved it.
The visual was cool.
It was really, really cool when you finally see, like, all the flags moving, and you can see that information is moving from top to bottom.
It's like color guard.
You know? Yeah. But it didn't. There was no love for both parts of it. Like, so one, in the book they actually had to spend time to train people to be able to perform these tasks, to make sure that they're doing it reliably. Because if somebody doesn't reliably do what they're supposed to do,
right,
the computer breaks.
Well, we didn't see all this because they weren't playing the game.
But this is in the book.
Right now I know, but
and this does happen in the book, where they are playing the game and, like, having to teach this information, make sure it's, like, shared with the people that are doing it, and then those people have to be trained. And it actually gets into what I think is kind of interesting is, like, so when people are flipping those flags, it's because they get a certain input or two certain inputs, and based off of those inputs, they have to respond with a very specific output every single time. If they see this, they have to do this. If they see this, they have to do this.
Okay.
And so it actually talks about, like, the different types of gates. You know, like, there are NOT gates, which takes in a single input and does the exact opposite. So if it sees a white flag, it will flip to a black flag. If it sees a black flag, it'll flip to a white flag. That's a NOT. It always switches from a 1 to a 0. It only sees one input. It gives the exact opposite output. It gets into, like, AND gates. It gets into ORs, XORs, XANDs. Like, it actually gets into the different types of, like, logic gates that happen in a computer. It doesn't spend too much time. Like, I don't think it is necessarily a turn off. I would say it's a turn on, at least for me. Not necessarily a turn on, but it gets into this information, and it actually, like, spends just a little bit of time on this, and therefore when they actually build that computer and then put everything through it, I think that has a bigger payoff versus, like, so many times we just see the visual. Like, we see the computer run, and it's gorgeous, but we didn't see any of the build up to the computer. In the show, they, during the period of time when it's like, before they got to the science over mysticism, there was that mysticism aspect, and there was talk of like comets and like what is the meaning of certain comets, like symbology, 2 comets, like, oh, that's not a great omen. 3 comets, that's terrible. You'd never want to see 3 comets. It turns out those are like the 3 suns. They don't understand that. It takes a while before you get to, but they talk about it ahead of time. And so when you have that moment where they see 3 comets and it turns into like that alignment of the 3 comets, which are actually 3 suns, and the effect of like people going into like it's build up and it's payoff. Versus I feel like the show just goes straight to like the payoff shots, but without building up to it. We didn't know that there was going to be like a crazy bad moment.
Right.
With like the 3 comets. But instead it just like it happened and it was like, oh, whoa, it's terrible. So I don't feel like there's that build up and payoff.
This is what happens when you read the book and then watch the movie.
Because
I enjoy this show, and some of this stuff that you're saying, it's like, okay, well, that would have been cool to know, but also I don't really feel like it. I'm not like, man, I missed that. Shucks.
Also, like minor science thing of just calling it out that doesn't make any sense is when the 3 stars line up and the people start floating off and getting pulled into the gravitation of those 3 bodies. The observers aren't immediately pulled. Like, everybody should be. Definitely the people below you shouldn't be pulled before you. And also because there's like the massive gravitational pull of these 3 bodies, the slight difference between people should be negligible compared to that. You shouldn't be watching people be pulled and be like, oh, that's going to happen to me in a moment. Just...
All right, moving on.
Let's chat about the organization.
Okay.
I'm actually going to start off. Slight difference. Books and show. I don't know if we're getting into a theme here. This one you might be interested in.
No, I'm down.
There are it gets glossed over in the show.
Okay.
It turns out there are different different parties within the organization, and there's a little bit of a power struggle. At least 2 of them are mentioned. The Adventists and the Redemptionists.
Maybe that comes later in these episodes.
Maybe it comes later.
Because we just are seeing the founder.
But like the scene that we've seen, it's mentioned. Things are brought in so much earlier in the show. So it's hard to believe that we would have seen this in the show and not mentioned it. But it does reference in the book, during that first meeting, that there are different parties.
What meeting?
The meeting where the shooting, where the
okay, yep,
police Pobo come in to break it up.
Okay,
I think that's a technical term. Pobo come in to break it up. During that meeting, the main character learns that there's like these different groups within it, and they have different aims, and there's like a little bit of a power struggle.
Okay.
And I just thought like it gave it a little bit more richness. I thought it was kind of interesting versus and that also kind of, I don't know, it like hearing them, Adventists and Redemptionists, it gets into something you talked about last week, like the religion aspect. And it makes sense with like this advanced civilization and that different groups would interpret it different ways.
Yeah.
Versus like some people are like, I don't know, maybe it's coming versus like we have a chance for redemption. It's interesting, and it feels a little bit more kind of like psychologically true to how different people would respond. That there wouldn't just be like one universal feeling.
Right.
That different people would respond in different ways, and there would be a power struggle to like, this has this meaning, So I thought it was a little bit more interesting in the book. And it gets straight to like shootout, which obviously is like visually interesting and makes you wonder who's going to make it, what, But I don't think it's quite as like enriching interesting.
But I mean that scene is the very end of episode 4.
Yes.
So maybe it comes
Maybe.
from the season. I don't know, but maybe it does. Okay. Why do you think she confided in Mike Evans? Like, of all people, why him? He was saving a bird species, some kind of brown-throated swallow. Is that what it was? Something like that. Why him? What makes him...
I think that if she felt like humanity is terrible, but there's still so much that's good, or maybe in him she saw that he could be a group that could be trusted, of after everything horrible she's seen, that she's seen that there are people that still want to preserve what is good. And by bringing him into this world, maybe he can be one of the ones that is redeemed.
Maybe. What about the father talk? Well, I know what your father did. Well, I know what your father did. He says, I know about your father. And she says, I know about your father.
Okay, yes.
So to me, she did some research and she chose this maybe because he has money to fund
I didn't
her...
remember that.
To fund her plan.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
we don't know what her plan was.
I think his father is like an oil baron.
Yes. Which means there's probably money. Because on that ship, the Judgment Day,
yeah.
It looks like the original satellite. Because she says it's like seeing an old friend.
Yes.
So, does she reach out to him because he has money? Is there some kind of... have their paths cross? I don't know. It just seemed like a weird pairing. Like, she meets him, once.
Yeah.
When they go to say that we're taking this property.
But he kind of says important key words to her. He mentions, I think, a line from Green Springs?
Yes.
Silent Springs.
The book that she had.
Yes.
That she had before she got caught.
Yes.
Yes.
And I think that was like the...
secret code.
He is one of the good ones.
Right.
That understands that there is a bigger thing.
Right. I don't know.
And that kind of goes back to part of what I think is glossed over with the show versus the book, is that so much of this is contingent upon that story coming from China.
Right.
And
right.
it is this story of a person going through the Cultural Revolution.
Right.
Watched her dad die because
essentially,
yes.
Like her mom turns on them.
Yes, who was a scientist that died because he would not
say the things.
He wouldn't go against his
right.
thoughts, against his beliefs.
Right.
That witnesses this, that then because she is a daughter to this and doesn't maybe say the right things but not bad enough to get executed, is sent through these bad things, but then because she's smart enough she ends up getting moved into the red base.
Right.
The red base is also kind of like a time and place thing.
Right.
Where we're dealing with a very specific period of time where there's all of these tensions and what is it trying to do? What are her intentions?
Right.
It feels very much like it is something that can only happen in a very specific time and very specific place. And I feel like that's kind of glossed over a little bit in the show. And I feel like exploring that could be a little bit interesting and show more people an interesting world.
Okay.
Or people that know that world would be a world that's oh, I understand how this could fit in this world I lived in.
Right.
I heard about from my parents, Right. So that's just my thoughts. Speaking of Mike Evans, this little side thing.
Side quest.
Side thing. We watched him in Why the Last Man. The young Mike Evans.
Yes.
Watch him in Why the Last Man.
Show that should have gotten a second.
Great, underrated. Yeah. It had its slow moments. It landed on its feet. It was so good by the end.
Whose show was that?
Maybe Hulu? I don't remember. But there is more to it, and it is a graphic novel. Highly recommend it. Very interesting. Recommend the graphic novel. Recommend one season of the show, knowing that you won't get more seasons. But it was interesting kind of seeing him again because I haven't.
Yeah.
And he's the main character, Yorick, from Why the Last Man.
I thought it was interesting that Mike Evans didn't seem to appreciate finding out that he was being watched. When the Santi said, "Nice to see you smile." And you could definitely tell he was he's spying on so many people and thinks it's fine. But as soon as he finds out that he's being watched, there's definitely this, like, uneasy feeling on his behalf. And it's, like, betrayal that someone would spy on him.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting. The conversations that they were having when the Santi said that humanity must learn to fear again. Like, I feel like that's probably a bigger thing.
And that kind of gets back to, like, some of that religious aspect. Like, you can see how there's, like, those undertones.
I have that.
That are running throughout.
Some notes about that coming up in the next section.
Yes.
But I did think that was, like, that's kind of threatening. Like, humanity must learn to fear again. Almost as threatening. Like, we're coming for your planet and you don't fear us, so we about to teach you a lesson, you know?
It's mentioned briefly, and I love that it's mentioned because it is such a great scientific number based off of where they're coming from a real place in our universe. And it's an accurate amount of time. 400 years.
Yeah, long time.
But like that's such an interesting setup and payoff. Like, I think that's a great gap between, like, the first and the second book.
Right.
Of, being contacted, realizing that this could be the place to go to, and then heading there.
Right. But even when Mike Evans is talking to that little girl on the Judgment Day, the boat, she says, will we be here? And he says, if the Lord wants us to be here, he will make it so, or,
Yeah.
So they're indifferent either way. They're like, oh, well, maybe we will make it. Maybe we won't make it.
Yeah.
If it's the Lord's will.
Right. That stuff hasn't quite happened in the first book.
In the book. Okay. This is another thing that I think is inconsistent. Right, so we're saying that this organization, right, they can spy on people.
Yeah.
They, the Santi, the voice in the box, knows that the boat has been located. Like, right, she informs Mike that they've been found.
Yeah.
That they know his plan, right?
Yeah.
So she seems to be this, or they seem to be this, like, all-knowing body. But yet Jin is able to walk into their party wired, right? Like, she has something on her, doesn't she?
When she goes to the meeting?
Yeah. How do they know when to bust in? She has to have some
They didn't show that, but that seems pretty obvious that she would have to be wired.
Right. She said, can you still see me? And they said, yeah, the light's green.
That's right.
So, I don't know how they're watching her or what if she's wearing, but they were definitely like, listen, like, take in information, don't say a lot, just be there and gather intel for us.
Yeah.
So we're saying that this all-knowing being in this group, right, who is, made this video game that we don't have for hundreds of years the technology for. So anyway, she just gets to go up in this meeting and, like, she's not, like, they're not watching her or getting information from her, and the Santi don't know it, or the organization doesn't know it. I thought that was just a little bit strange. Okay, so moving on to metaphors, symbolism, and parallels.
If I may.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is the most kind of interesting here is a lie about a liar. And it kind of made me think about language and art and books, and I think it's actually very sad. The world that the Santi live in, this idea of when you communicate everything. Everything you know.
Okay.
There's no hiding anything, no anything like that. And I remember when I was in school learning about Moby Dick, it was difficult translating it into a language. I don't remember which one.
Okay.
And the intro of the book is brilliant. Call Me Ishmael. It is instantly planting so many seeds, but who knows exactly what it means? It's kind of up to your interpretation. Is that not his name? Is it his name? Was that not his name, but it has become how he talks about himself? And the language it was being translated into, they didn't have a way of saying, like, my name may or may not be Ishmael, but that is what you can call me, And that, to me, kind of reads like how the Santi's life is, of not having these metaphors, subtleties, kind of beauty of being able to communicate in different ways.
But that also means that they lie. Like, That's one thing I liked about working with animals is they don't lie, right? Like their intentions are clear. They may go about them like, like I'm hunting you so I'm quiet, but my intention is clear. I'm hunting you.
But also think about like a metaphor. Not everything has to be a lie and a way of hiding things, but a beautiful way of being able to equate two things as being similar or even the same. And not having to say, this thing is very close to this thing, but it definitely isn't this thing. So I'm not describing this thing by saying this thing. I'm saying that they are parallel.
Right.
They are very close.
Which makes sense. But that's not what they were talking about Little Red Riding Hood and the wolf's intentions. Like, he had intentions to eat Little Red Riding Hood, and he was hiding that.
That is a very clear... lie. As far as black and white goes, that is black. But there are so many things that fall on that spectrum, like Call Me Ishmael.
Right.
That may be completely on the white end of the spectrum. That may not at all be a lie, or it might be a small mystery, or it might even just be like, if that is a name he grew into over time, that may be technically true, but still point towards more information.
Right.
And so to me, it's interesting because I generally am a science nerd. I think is the technical term.
Absolutely.
Technically, if you look in the textbooks, the section about like putting people's heads in toilets, I'm a science nerd.
Okay.
But I also love art, and I think that this kind of gets into something so important in art. Like, we wouldn't have... Van Gogh is, to a certain extent, interpretive. He didn't try to represent perfectly every brushstroke. He gave the idea of what was happening rather than trying to paint a picture.
Okay. I can see your point. I can definitely see your point. Interpretation, I guess, to me is a little bit different than, like, hiding your intentions. But
sometimes, like, that's also like the unreliable narrator, like this beautiful idea of sometimes you read something, watch something, and you can easily gloss over and be like, okay, it's weird that this person is reporting things this way, but if you look into it, you realize maybe they shouldn't be trusted, and you look further into it, and there's another layers.
Right.
Like, that's where it gets in, rather than having everything be,
right,
just like so clear, perfect on the surface. For me, it's...
But what do you think that this means for the relationship between the Santi and the people? Because the Santi definitely say that they cannot coexist with liars. So, they...
And is everybody, like, in this
right,
world...
like, is everyone a liar? What does that mean? I mean, they're going to wipe out the people of the planet and just use the planet, or...
It's also interesting because, like, some of this is just a problem of imperfect communication of information. Like, the way we communicate is an imperfect system.
Right.
There never will be a perfect transfer of that. Even some of mathematics is based off of ideas that we can't necessarily prove. All of those axioms. So it's interesting that there never will be a perfectly precise way of communicating, at least that we know of.
Right.
And that's the world we live in. The ship, I thought, had an interesting name.
Judgment Day.
Mm-hmm. And it gets back into some of the stuff we were talking about with regards to religion.
Yeah, the religious undertone.
And it's like, do some of these people think that this is... Half the people will be judged unworthy and half the people will be judged worthy, and these will flourish? Or is this like everybody ends and then you'll be kind of... Like, it kind of makes you wonder, like, what is the end game? What is judgment? What do they think it is? And is there... If the Santi can't misrepresent themselves...
Right. That's... it feels like they're coming, or at least it did feel like they were coming to coexist or to teach the humans. But now it says, they can't coexist with liars. So they can't hide their intentions. They can't lie about that. So what does that now mean for what happens once they land.
Right.
And also, who are all these people on the ship?
On the ship with the Santi?
No, the Judgment Day.
Oh, the Judgment Day.
Who are all those people?
I think that's stuff that comes in a little bit more in, like, book 2.
Okay. So we gotta hold off. Okay. I thought that was an interesting metaphor.
Okay.
When Will was in the hospital talking about his cancer, he said that he had a conversation with it, and that it said that it wasn't there to hurt him, or it wasn't vindictive, or it wasn't on purpose. It needed a place to live.
Right.
It was just looking for a home, and it wasn't personal.
Just in his pancreas.
Yeah,
Look, you take this corner of my pancreas, and I continue with my life.
They made an agreement that the cancer would just stay in this one section so they could coexist.
Yeah.
I thought that was an interesting analogy for perceivably what's to come with the Santi.
I kind of feel like some of the other characters have had parallels that either are telling the same story or are kind of prepping them to be sympathetic with the Santi. So Jin, when she went to Raj's family, and Raj's dad told the story of, like the Indian army versus the Pakistani army. And there's the thing where it's like one of them was on the top of this cliff. The other group, his group was on the bottom, starving, freezing, whatever, And he climbs up, tricks them, manages to kill them. And I don't feel like the other side was necessarily painted as, like, ideologically wrong as much as it was, like, a story of survival.
Right.
Literally of us versus them. Like, only one of these two parties will survive.
Right.
And I'm in this party, and I would like it to be...
My party.
My party.
Right.
Similar to that, Jin mentions this story of, like, a flood.
Her family, right?
Where she lost her parents.
Okay.
And it's to her, like a cataclysmic devastation that she could not avoid. She had nothing that she could do to deal with it. She lost her family, and somebody, I think like the mystery woman that works in the organization, said something about, like, you can continue, like...
Your parents live in you.
Yes.
Your parents.
So yeah, basically, like, she can continue her family's story.
Right.
And to me, once again, that, like, sounds similar to the Santi of dealing with this terrible situation.
Right.
And they can...
Well, that's kind of what the followers said when they were people who were leaving the ship. And they were saying, if one of us survives, we all survive.
Right. Yes.
So
same
like, idea.
I feel like certain people are potentially be saying it's parallels. Maybe they're sympathetic.
Yeah.
To that idea. I don't know if I mentioned this before, and I meant to earlier. The book, I think, does a much better job of showing how drastic and terrible the situation is for the Santi.
Okay.
To really help you understand that they don't really have much of a choice. Because if you look at this from the perspective of the show, it can kind of seem like, I don't know, maybe the Santi are like this terrible race that's just like, yeah, they're dealing with this, like, bad 3-body problem. They need to, like, leave their... It definitely... The show doesn't make it seem like it's great. But think about it this way. In the book, the planet that the Santi are living on has been ripped in two. One of them being completely barren. Life is not there. The other one, life barely came back from. They barely survived it. They've done a number of studies to try and figure out the origins of their tri-solar system. And what they have discovered is that there used to be 11 other celestial bodies orbiting this system. There used to be 12 of them. They're down to one.
It's like a half of one, really.
down to half of one. They're back to 2. They were at 1. They went back to 2. Barely. Like, they're in a shit situation. This isn't just like, I don't know. When should we dehydrate? When should we rehydrate? It's something's gonna happen. They're gonna plummet into one of these stars. They're going to be grabbed in the gravitational pull and slingshotted out of the solar system by one of these stars. They're going to be fucked. it's happened to 11 other planets, it's going to happen to them.
That makes them more sympathetic. Like,
yes.
That's based on the message that UNG gets back first when she sends out that one. It says, luckily I got your message first. If we come, we're taking your planet.
Right.
It makes them feel hostile.
Yeah.
But that makes them feel like desperate,
Yes, you can definitely, based off what you see in the show, you can kind of think that they may be terrible and hostile. But I do feel like there's a little bit more sympathy that you can kind of glean from their situation.
Right. They also seem childlike, where it's like, we do not understand. We do not understand. Like, teaching a child the concept of lying.
Lying.
Interesting. I'm interested to see where this goes.
Yeah. But with that, I think our journey has come to an end. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, Mark should be back with us, unless he's having too much fun on his vacation, at which point you will see Dawn again. We will talk about episode 5, definitely, maybe 6, we'll see. And thank you so much. We'll see you next week.